Here's what we're going to talk about today. One, Airbnb, everybody's favorite. Hopefully, I won't say hopefully, but at this point, I'm pretty sure at least everybody stayed at Airbnb once. Of course, Apple's one of our favorite companies to talk about on top of Tesla, but yeah, we're going to spend some time talking about Tesla. And of course, one of our other EV darlings, Rivian, had their earnings this weekend. So we'll kind of wrap up with that, hopefully. But yeah, so that's our 3-topic episode for this week.
So let's talk about Airbnb icons first. Last week, after we had recorded our podcast, I saw this pop up in my YouTube feed around Brian Chesky's presentation and reveal of Airbnb icons. I had heard about Airbnb icons during the week, but I never really looked into it. But I watched the entire video that he presented, and it was interesting. It was one of those typical Brian Chesky ideas where it's really out of the box thinking, kind of being big and also very different. I think he's done a number of those over the years as CEO of Airbnb. And by the way, we were talking last week around companies that are still founder driven. I know we were talking about like the FANG or the bigger companies, but Airbnb is another one that's still founder driven after so many years. And so Airbnb icons, what Airbnb is doing is they're releasing a set of experiences this summer that are meant to be a bit outlandish, and they've got celebrity power behind it as well. And the way that they're releasing these is they're dropping them. So basically, if you go to Airbnb's icon site, you'll see a bunch of these different experiences and stays, but they're not available yet to book. So Brian Chesky used the word drop, which is being used in the NFT world, is being used in the sneaker world. When is a drop going to happen? But basically, the one icon that they featured was you can stay in the Up House. And so what we mean by the Up House is that movie Up. It's a Pixar movie Up, a very popular movie. I'm sure you've seen it, but that story is about an old man and a kid who travel across the world in a floating house. And so they replicated this house, I believe it's in New Mexico, on a ridge somewhere overlooking a canyon. And what they did was they built the house from scratch. So they actually built this house up there. They replicated the movie, the inside of the house with what's in the movie. So the couch, the popular chairs that the old guy and his wife sat in. And they also tied thousands of balloons to this house so that it looked like it was floating in the air. The last thing is that this house is going to be suspended in the air by a crane. So when you actually stay in the house, you have that feeling of being high in the sky, floating through the clouds in this Up House. So that was the main house that they featured. You can stay with Kabi Lame, the famous and biggest TikTok star who made his rise to fame by not saying anything. He's going to host you. Another one was you can stay in Paris, overlooking the river where the Paris Olympics opening and closing ceremonies are going to take place. Lastly, there's another one that he talked about where it's actually, I'll mention two more. One is you can stay in Prince's former house or one of Prince's properties and be hosted by, I think, Prince's sister. And then the last one is a VIP night with Kevin Hart, where you can stay with Kevin Hart and he will actually give you a stand-up show live with you and your guests that are staying there. So these are all examples of the icons that they have announced. And the catch is, or the hook is that you would think that you'd have to spend thousands of dollars for these experience, but some of them are free. So Airbnb has obviously invested a ton of money into making these come to life. The way that you actually get chosen is you need to submit a story, and they're going to be combing through all the stories of potential guests and select people who to stay with in these icons.
Yep.
So I thought it was pretty cool. It brings me back some memories of a former place we used to work in, where they did the Paris, the Eiffel Tower stay, the Eiffel Tower home.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it brings back memories of that. But also, in my opinion, I think this is cool. But also, yeah, they must be spending a ton of money just to do these partnerships, and
Mhm.
I'm not sure. Maybe you can determine like the marketing advantage here, the marketing play, but
Yeah.
I don't know. I just don't. It's drawing flat for me.
It's it's kind of weird. Well, let's take a step back then. Like Chesky, he's not a product guy, right? He is a I forget. His background is like design, right?
Right.
Design, marketing. I think that's his background, if I remember, of all the founders. But anyways, I think this totally plays into his background, and I agree. I don't think it's not like a scalable product for Airbnb. I feel like it's more of like that marketing kind of like halo type thing that they've introduced. And that's all I feel like it is. It's like it's not really that special, but they've been doing stuff like this over the years. Like there was the Audi experience where you're like out in the middle of the desert and you have like this a what is it? A8 and you drive around the desert like however you want. I feel like this is just a play off of what they've done in the past, even at HomeAway, like you mentioned, like the first company to allow to be able to get people to stay actually inside the Eiffel Tower, right? And so I think that's what I feel like. It's really just more like a halo thing just to drive interest. I was looking at it like as you were talking and there's like, train at the X mansion, crash at the X mansion. It's like it's something it's a repackaged version of what they've already been doing over the past years.
With experiences, you mean?
With experiences, yeah. Or I guess it's maybe it's like that next step, right? So it's not just about where you're staying, but it's also, I guess, like with the Kevin Hart example. But some of these, it doesn't look like there's really anything other than it's a themed it's a themed house or a themed
Mm.
place to stay, right? But yeah,
Interesting.
yeah,
So
yeah.
when you started articulating that, my first internal reaction, I don't know, went to Netflix for some reason.
Hmm.
And the reason why it went to Netflix is because Netflix has, over the years, has evolved and has really started to accelerate more of growth through like big names and originals and shows and movies in cahoots or partnerships with these big names, right?
Hmm. Yeah.
So this is similar. Like if Airbnb, like what you're saying, what I heard there is Airbnb is trying to evolve their experiences, which is
Hmm.
something that was essentially kind of the a shift in direction of the future company versus just stays that they
Yep.
had started probably 7 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago,
Yep.
and now it's Airbnb is yeah, less concerned about lodging, more invested in experiences. Here's a way to use influencers slash star power
Hmm.
with exclusive partnerships
Yep.
to exploit that. That's kind of how I started to self narrate in my mind based on what you were saying as their strategy.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, right, they attempted to do just, like, local experiences at one point, right? You're right, local people in different places could offer, like, "This is a walking tour of Chicago from somebody who's lived here for 20 years," right? So they did that for how they introduced that a while ago. So maybe what Chesky is trying to do with this is leading into kind of his ultimate vision of what stays plus an experiences would look like on Airbnb, right? They're way out there, but again, I really think this is I was reading it's like people are calling publicity stunt. And like sure, publicity stunt, but it's more like trying to create like what the Halo product is. right? Sure, these are if you thought like of Apple or something, right? These are like the halo things of what the ultimate Airbnb I don't wanna say experiences, but what the ultimate Airbnb thing is, like
Product.
stays plus experience. Yeah, ultimate Airbnb product, right? And so I think that's really what this is maybe it's just an outline of what of how he plans to reintroduce experiences because it's sat kind of there, it's, like, been there, and I remember in the past, he's talked about yeah, he's been thinking about, like, how they can do this and make it better.
Yeah, it's an interesting thesis. I think when you were talking about that, the Halo product, for some reason, I keep going back to streaming networks, and I think about HBO Max.
Mhm.
Their Halo product is Game of Thrones, right? At the same time, they invested a ton of money into Game of Thrones,
Yep.
but it has returned a lot of money as well, and
Yeah.
it keeps subscribers on HBO Max just for Game of Thrones, and then the spin-offs,
Mhm.
right? House of
Yeah.
Dragons. So that's an interesting one, and the the thing that just gets me though is this the right thing that Airbnb should be spending money on right now? I need to take a look at Airbnb's financials, but
Mhm.
what's their market cap? Their market cap, okay, the market cap is almost 100 billion, 92 billion dollars as of right now. So let's say they spent, how much do you think they spent on this? Under a billion?
I mean, each of these experiences in and of themselves are probably in the millions, right?
So maybe let's say they spent 600 million then in total for all of this.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I don't know if they like, yeah, like if you said each of these were partnership, everything to get it up, whatever, probably anywhere from 1 to 10 million each.
Okay.
Like versus like this, like staying at the last blockbuster. I'm sure that's in the middle of nowhere. And it's just not. It's
Yeah.
probably like less than 1 million. But like this, like spend the night in the Ferrari Museum or Barbie's Malibu Dream House. I'm sure those are upwards of like several million, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, just and then
Especially
just how much did they pay Doja Cat? How much did they pay Kevin Hart to do this?
oh yeah, totally. Like Kevin Hart. I'm sure that's like a multi-million-dollar deal for him to do that, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's cool. Who knows? Who knows? That's where I would peg it. Anywhere between 1 10 million for each of these experiences.
Yeah. And I mean,
And
it's good that they're paying marketing dollars into they're paying marketing dollars into acquiring new users, right? That's ultimately what this is. And yeah, maybe their budget was $500 million or something like that.
yeah, I mean they've always done cool marketing things. So we'll see.
Yeah.
We'll see if it slowly dies down. I think the telltale sign will be is like once you start to see like these experiences, like these icons start to trickle away. If
Yeah.
that makes sense. Right? It's like, oh, now we have one a month. Oh, now we have like one a quarter.
Okay. Well,
We'll see. We'll see if they follow up in their fall release. That's one thing I do like over Reed. They're pretty consistent about that. So
yeah.
this is part of their summer release, right? And so their winter release, they'll probably do something. So we'll see what's if there is a next stage and whether I'm right or not. And
Yeah.
if I'm right, hey Chesky, you can hire me. We're on the same page.
Yeah. I mean, good for them for doing it. I'm always fascinated by these ideas that people come up with.
Mhm.
I don't
That's
know.
why it's good to be the founder,
Yeah. So it's a bit
right?
flat for me. I'm curious what the internal conversations were at Airbnb on launching icons.
Probably Chesky's like, this is my idea. Execute.
Yeah. This is my idea. We just laid off, 10% of the company, but let's go pay Kevin Hart instead.
Yeah. Pretty sure that that might have been a conversation.
All right. Airbnb icons. We will see this summer how they perform.
Yeah.
All right. Let's move on to Apple. Apple's been bubbling up on the rumor mill slash news
Yep.
wave the last week here. So it's been very interesting. Over the weekend, saw this one that OpenAI and Apple have reportedly solidified a deal to bring ChatGPT to the iPhone.
Mhm.
We don't know what this is going to look like, but we could imagine it either be in the form of just a app that's comes on every iPhone or more integrated into some other thing. I can't imagine. I don't think they would integrate it with Siri right now. I think that's it's too early, or maybe they just I don't think it's as easy to solve that problem. So I don't think it's going to be integrated into Siri. In my mind, I think it'll be more of just like a an app um, that's presented high and usable out the gate with iPhone.
I don't think it'll be a standalone app because, like, ChatGPT already has that. I do think they'll probably do what Microsoft has done with Copilot, right? Do think they'll try to start integrating it with Siri as far as not necessarily powering Siri directly, but just being a second resource for Siri to pull out of or to pull from as part of her responses.
Mm,
I do think, though, that they will use it to make Siri to build the what is it? The understanding
yeah,
in
long term,
Siri. So,
long.
like, when you're yeah, yeah, like, when you're talking I think that would be the immediate improvement. Like, what was it? I was seeing some articles because we're speeding into Apple's WWDC, Worldwide Developer
WWDC.
Conference, WWDC in June, right? And the rumor mills are all about making Siri suck less. So I think that'd be the easiest one is just recognition, like question recognition of when people are talking with Siri is something Apple could probably immediately tap into without necessarily impacting, all the concerns that Apple would likely have with responses. So I think that's probably where they'll start is just to make Siri's understanding of verbal communication like 100x better than where it is today. And then as far as whether they start to make Siri more real, like more human, I guess is probably what or
Yeah,
more of like an actual AI assistant or who knows
yeah.
what they're gonna call it, but I'm sure they will come up with a new term for Siri for it.
You actually, yeah, you explained it better than I could in terms of figuring out how to integrate. Now I imagine you ask Siri something and it'll spit out what Siri usually spits out, which is decent but not great.
Yeah,
And then potentially I'll also say according to according to ChatGPT, blah
right.
blah blah. The other use
Yeah.
case I see is when you use Spotlight on your phone. Do you ever use
Mhm.
Spotlight when you pull down and you
Oh, yeah, no,
yeah,
that's how I find apps on my phone now, just
yeah.
Spotlight.
There's the other use case I see is you enter something in there and then it has a
Mhm.
little module for the ChatGPT response.
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a lot of ways. I mean, I'm sure there's probably some form of it that they might integrate in the App Store too, I would think. That would make the most sense to me too, because App Store recommendations are kinda bad, right? But if you think about what ChatGPT or maybe it's just LLM in general, it's probably an interesting way in order to get people onto similar apps or apps that other people think are relevant, right? Versus what, a typical ML type model might do as far as recommendations. Anyways, there's a lot of interesting use cases that you probably do, but the
Yeah.
immediate one is all around Siri, I think.
Big win for
But
Microsoft. Like
yeah,
as Apple starting to use ChatGPT, that's just a
yeah.
big contract, right? And big, longer term longevity.
Say because I think the follow up, right, what you were saying was like OpenAI is going to release a kind of like a search based product or whatnot, and like yesterday, Altman, I mean, it came out pretty. It's like no, we're not going to launch a search app. That's not what we're doing.
Oh, I
But we
didn't
have
see
some
that.
cool stuff. Yeah. So like he actually came out and said, "No, we're not doing search. We're doing something that I think is pretty cool." But we'll find out Monday. It's kind of well, the timing is kind of interesting because it's right before Google's I/O, which is
Hmm.
on the Tuesday, right? So I'm really curious what it's going to be or how he's going to try and trump Google's I/O event. But
So they are releasing something next week,
yeah,
but
on Monday.
he's being very explicit to not
Yeah.
label it a search.
Yeah, and so that's why I'm curious. It's like, so do you mean it's not like a typical search engine? Is that what you're trying to say, right?
Alright.
We'll see. I'm very curious. I'm very curious. But, yeah, Monday, 10 AM, they'll be streaming for OpenAI. Um,
Sundar must be having a pretty stressful weekend right now. Like, oh,
I
what
don't
are they
know.
gonna do? What are they gonna
I
do?
know. It'll be it'll be super interesting because there's like tit for tats and stuff where I think Sundar did an interview with BBC sometime this week, and they'd brought up where Satya had said, "Yeah, we're finally in a position where we can make Google dance or something." If you remember that quote, and I think Sundar had responded, "It's like, yeah, that's the trap I'm not going to fall into because." We dance to our own music. We're not gonna dance to somebody else's music. It's kinda how he framed it, and I was like, "Okay, these
Yeah.
guys are going at each other now." But
I think he
anyways, so back to Apple, they'll probably do something. I think it'll all be focused on Siri, and then long term, kinda what you're speaking to is probably when they'll start to sprinkle it throughout the ecosystem.
Yeah, so I think by WWDC, which is in June,
Mhm.
I think is it in June? Oh, it's only a month away. I was
Yeah,
gonna say by WWDC, I'm sure they'll unveil like APIs or SDKs to start integrating with more AI intelligence, and then by September,
yeah,
when the new
mhm,
OS comes out, is when
yep.
developers and we'll start to see that stuff coming to life in iOS. What is it, 19?
Is that where yeah, it'll be 19. That's right, we're on
Yeah,
18 right now.
it's a short
Yeah,
timeline.
I'm sure it'll be
Uh,
we should make bets. What's the new kit gonna be called?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I can't even remember what is Vision Pro's kit called?
Let's see. Vision Pro SDK,
It was
Vision OS.
is it Vision OS? Is that
Yeah.
what it is? It's literally Vision OS. Oh, it is Vision OS. AIOS? Yeah.
No, it's gonna be Siri OS.
Siri OS, you think so? Okay. It's yeah, it'll have to be a kit, yeah. There will have to be a kit based around AI.
Yeah,
I just think.
I think it'll be Siri OS. They have to
Yeah.
they need to retain the brand, like that name and the brand, and try
Yeah.
to have Siri have its
That's yeah,
moment.
that's actually not a bad call. They might do it. Siri OS. Ooh, that kind
I will say, of all the Magnificent Seven slash Fang companies right now, I think
of
Sundar is probably at the bottom and on the hottest seat. I think after hearing all these earnings reports, I think Microsoft's killing it, Meta's killing it,
yeah,
Apple's lukewarm, but we talked about Tim Cook a lot in the last couple
yeah,
episodes.
yeah.
Elon's in the hot seat, but he just got that halo effect that he's still in growth mode. And then yeah, Jensen's killing it. Who would I miss? Oh, Amazon. I mean, Amazon. I feel like they're killing it, but the CEO is just not there yet in terms of star power.
Yeah, he's just kinda like plain old CEO. He's definitely not a Bezos. So,
Yeah,
yeah. Amazon's kind of fallen to the wayside as far as what I it's just not interesting. It's a yeah.
they're
Big
in
company, it's not interesting.
they're in that new like non-founder CEO stage that we talked about.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
We'll see all the good things we want to talk about Google I/O next episode when they have it this week. We'll come back next week and give more opinion on that. The last thing with Apple is the ongoing rumors of partnership with Rivian, and this came up a few months ago. It's always been kind of there, but I feel like lately it's starting to heat up even more in terms of potential partnerships with Rivian. And 3 days ago, there were a bunch of hits that kind of started to accelerate some of that more. So we don't know. Like it's all rumor, it's all speculation. However, it does seem to make sense in terms of doing something with Rivian.
Mhm.
I think the only thing that doesn't make sense to me in terms of a partnership with Rivian is I don't think their cars are not necessarily fit with Apple's brand. I think some of it does. Like Rivian is centered around kind of rugged, outdoorsy, environmental, but their cars I wouldn't consider are like sleek or luxury, which I do think Apple's hardware products are usually that. But we'll see.
I could see it being, not a direct Apple brand, but like a sub brand. It would kind of fit. Well, I guess when you say rugged and stuff, I will like their trucks definitely, but I think the R2, R3 probably fall a little bit outside of your more everyday type vehicle, which could eventually play. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see how the partnership, because Apple still spent billions on their Project Titan, and I'm sure there has to be something that came out of that, if not from the actual car side, but the software side, and maybe that's probably what they're exploring with Rivian is like, how can we still, because it's the auto market is still a big thing. I'm sure Apple sees something there. So maybe it's more on the software, more platform side of how they can help Rivian either interconnect or maybe use or leverage some of the technology that Apple, I'm assuming, probably built.
Yeah.
So we'll see.
It's basically going to be their CarPlay next gen CarPlay is what they'd
Maybe.
want to
Yeah,
test.
that's where I think too. Yeah.
That's a good one because when I look at a lot of when I watch video like TikToks or YouTubes or even browse forums around Tesla's and usually around Tesla, like their navigation. Every
Yeah.
time I see one of those, there's always more than one person saying that CarPlay is superior. And I don't disagree. I think CarPlay is a good software product. I've used it myself. Usually when I rent cars when I'm traveling and it has CarPlay, it's easy to just connect my iPhone and
Yep.
it works. So I think it is a good software product. The cons I have with it is one, I have to connect my phone at all times.
Mhm.
I don't want to have my,
Mhm.
my phone connected to the car at all times. And oh, and then that just leads to dependency on my iPhone. Whereas the
Mhm.
standalone things like I have in my Tesla, it's a whole suite in itself and has its own apps. Like it has its
Mhm.
own navigation. Don't have to worry about using my phone's GPS to actually do it because
Yeah.
that kills my phone's battery, right? But a CarPlay, next gen CarPlay could potentially solve these things. I also think the UI of CarPlay is a bit stuffy, like it's a bit too tight. Like the windows are small and all that stuff. So
Mhm.
yeah, that's a good one. Like they could partner with Rivian and just test their next gen CarPlay, and maybe Rivian's the first one to do it.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Maybe. We'll see.
I'd rather them just acquire Rivian to bump up my stock, but
They could.
yeah,
Like, I mean, Rivian's not even worth that much anymore.
yeah.
So,
Well, speaking of, we wanted to touch on Rivian earnings, or I wanted to touch on Rivian earnings because I've been follow, I love Rivian and I've been following them as a hawk almost as closely as I follow Tesla. But Rivian had their earnings last week, and some of the main highlights is they announced that they produced their 100,000th vehicle, so that was a milestone for the company.
yeah, that's a big milestone.
Yeah, their CEO. I was listening to it for a bit, but then I dropped off after I think midway through the Q&A.
Mhm.
He explicitly stated that Rivian is a technology platform brand. So he's trying to make sure that Rivian is seen as a tech company like Tesla versus a car
Gotta get
company.
valued as yeah, gotta get that growth valuation, right?
Yeah. He hasn't used AI though, so once he uses AI, then that's what he's missing. He just needs to use AI and then their market cap will double.
AI, we're gonna start our own
Yeah.
robotaxi initiative.
Some of the highlights from their Q1 earnings, they did 1.2 billion in revenue in Q1. So they're doing the billions in revenue in quarters, which is really actually really
Yeah,
good.
revenue perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the profit that's the problem.
right, but they're losing money per car, and their gross profit was negative 527 million. And I think the big thing was quarter over quarter, it actually got worse,
Yep.
which is what we're seeing in all the EV earnings, right? Q1 was pretty bad compared to the previous quarters because of the slower demand curve that's happening with electric
Yep.
vehicles. And then their EBITDA was negative 800 million. So every quarter they're still losing money. But again, they are still an early, technically startup company that's burning
Yeah.
cash and trying to establish growth. I want to give some contrasting perspective of the other company that I always have to bring up when I bring up Rivian is Lucid.
Uh-huh.
Lucid actually in Q1 they only made something like 300 million in revenue.
Hmm.
So they're not making much revenue. And since the end of last year, I think since Q3, they've been flat. They haven't grown at all. Year over
Yep.
year, Lucid was negative growth. I think it was like negative 40%, I want to say, which is pretty bad. Rivian, on the other
Huh?
hand, year over year was 80%. So
Hmm.
they almost doubled their growth in 1 year,
Mhm.
which
Yep.
is, in my eyes, like these fundamentals are good.
Yep.
I think they have 8 quarters of runway left in the bank,
Yep.
whereas Lucid has 4 quarters, I believe, of runway left.
Yep. Yep.
So I think by next year, like even if Rivian is still in the situation where they can't solve the cash burn problem, their fundamentals are good enough that they'll be able to do something with like raising money or they'll get to the point where they have to sell right at a
Yeah.
maybe not what they want to sell for or hostile takeover.
Yeah.
I don't know, something like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what makes it a tough case to continue investing, right? Because like you said, if they can't make 2026, or let's say if they barely make it to 2026 to launch the R2, right? But they've run out of money, they're gonna have to issue new shares, right? And that is just gonna dilute any
Yeah.
existing shareholder. So I think that's the that's what makes it a tough call. It's like you want to invest because yeah, it's a cool company. They're doing cool products, whatever. Now they're a technology platform brand.
Yeah,
um,
that's a good
so
point. I think
there's that risk.
that's a good point, and that's a good point into why maybe the whales are skeptical, right, of investing right now.
Yeah. I mean, I was like, when we were talking about market cap, yeah, Apple should buy. It's like it's slightly under 10 billion as far as market cap, right? That's like 10% of Apple's stock buyback program. Yeah, well, we'll see. I'm not tempted to average down at this point.
I think my strategy now with Rivian, and this is not financial advice, entertainment purposes only, but my strategy now is cool. I've got shares in Rivian, so I'm going to hold on to that.
Mhm.
I think I'll start DCAing a little bit, but I'm mostly waiting for it to hit $8 again
Yep. Same.
to retest, that area. But if it starts to retest that area, that's when I'll start to maybe dollar cost a bit heavier into it.
Yeah.
Um, but I like where I'm sitting with it right now. All right, those are our
Trademark.
stories. Those are our stories for this week. Sounds like next week we'll most likely be talking about ChatGPT and
Mhm.
deconstructing what they came up with. Google I/O is happening next week, so we'll have a lot to talk about following
Mhm.
what Google presents, and
Yep.
then probably more Tesla news because we didn't talk about Tesla this week, but
I know, we kinda bypassed them, and I
it
was
was
gonna talk a little about Dorsey,
It
but
was hard. It was hard. I was containing myself. I'm like,
I
we can't go
know.
Tesla this week. I will say, I mentioned that FSD 12. I thought wasn't great. So I mentioned in that episode that perhaps I didn't just get the right version or something was. So
Mhm.
I got updates over the since then,
Mhm.
and I was using it yesterday when me and my family were driving around, and
Mhm.
I'm gonna say it actually is a lot better
Is it
now.
better? Okay.
Like I was able to have it on for 95% of the drive. And
Oh, wow.
in previous times when I'm with my family, I don't turn it on because
Mhm.
it would brake hard, it would accelerate
Yeah.
too hard, or
Mhm.
it would just be very like jittery around
Yeah.
turns.
Mhm.
But yesterday was the first day I felt like confident that I could have it on with
Mhm.
my family in the
Mhm.
car.
Okay.
So yeah,
Robotaxi coming soon.
it actually
Without
was
your
really,
Tesla.
yeah, I think good timing on Elon
Uh,
to get everyone. I think it was the right time to get everyone to experience it because
yeah.
it was pretty smooth. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. Well, we
Alright.
will see each other next week, and
Yep.
hope you have a good week, Tony.
Yeah, you too.